Hello, welcome back to Advanced Writing. Professor Kent Lee here. So in the last video, we kind of talked about professional academic sources, particularly professional sources. And there'll be more explanation of that in this video. And then a little bit about popular sources and what they are and why they're not good. And my kind of three-way distinction, again, between popular, professional, and academic sources. So let's go ahead and get back into the video. I know this is a couple of parts of a couple of older videos that I recorded 1 or 2 years ago. Then we have 3 academic research journals and articles and other kinds of academic works. These are the real academic sources. And maybe people have told you, oh, you need to use academic sources in your college papers. Well, are you ready for heavy academic stuff like this? This is a psychology journal I get. Let's look at some of the articles here. Let's see here. Resisting Temptation, Tracking How Self-Control Conflicts Are Successfully Resolved in Real Time. For Whom the Mind Wanders and When Varies Across Laboratory and Daily Life Settings. Here's a good one. Genetic Influence on Intergenerational Educational Attainment. Sound like something you would read? Would you be ready for something like this? Probably not, unless you go to graduate school and you get trained in kind of the research stuff and theories. You wouldn't be able to understand an academic research journal like this, but this is what your professors have to write for. Let's take a linguistics, one from linguistics. Yeah, this is published in Korea, but it's one of the better ones in Korea. It's called English Teaching. It's kind of applied linguistics research. See, exploring the use of hedges and stance devices in relation to Korean EFL learners' argumentative writing qualities. Korean EFL learners, English as a foreign language learners, processing of English caused motion constructions. So it's kind of applied linguistics, education linguistics. Probably more understandable than the psychology journal, but again, this is probably something you wouldn't be able to deal with, and you probably won't encounter until maybe your 3rd or 4th year of college, when you start reading some of the stuff in some of your more advanced classes as a college student. This is a pretty good one, by the way. So those are academic research journals, and those are your real academic sources. Let me see what else we've got. Edited volumes, you probably won't come across that much, and that's where, for example, you have, I should have one here. Oh, I happen to have this. It's called Literary Theory and Anthology. It's a collection of research articles and reference articles by academic literature experts. Kind of not my main field, but I have it just for fun. I'm strange like that. So it's a collection of research articles by different people, but it's in a book format. And you have kind of like monographs. It's a research article. Let's take, yeah, this looks nice. Simpler Syntax. Oh, that's a big one. So it's kind of more research oriented. It's by academic experts for other academic experts. It's book form. It represents their original research and research by others, but it's for other experts. Okay, so you might see how some of these sources are obviously not of good quality for college papers. Some are, and some are kind of in a gray area. It will depend. There are certain kinds of sources that are maybe okay for a freshman, for writing a paper in a freshman or 2nd year class, 1st or 2nd year college class, an introductory class. But you probably wouldn't use it for a paper in your more advanced 3rd or 4th year college class. And the kind of stuff you deal with in your 3rd or 4th year college class and the kinds of sources you would read and cite in papers, you're not ready for that yet in your 1st or 2nd year of college. So that's why I think the traditional distinction between academic sources versus non-academic general popular sources is not really helpful or useful, because one, I think it's more of a continuum, and it's more complex. I make a 3-way distinction in sources. I make a 3-way distinction. I say There are general or popular sources that you generally don't use for college papers, but there are some special exceptions. We'll talk about it in a later video. There's some special exceptions. But generally, these sources you don't use. So pretty much 1 through 11, maybe 12. Well, your first or second year college textbook, that's kind of, it may be new information to you, but it's not new to anyone else in the field. It's kind of common information. So I'd say 1 through 12, maybe 13 also. Actually, I'm not sure about the Chosunilbo. I don't know Korean newspapers well enough to say, so I'm not going to commit to that. I think 13 is a little bit borderline. So definitely 1 through 12, these are kind of more popular or general sources. The tone and style is pretty simple, very informal. The information may be common information, or at least ideas that are not really original or unique or interesting, or not very informative. It's not really new expert information. The sources used, there may be no sources. There may be some sources that are cited informally. Maybe the sources are good, maybe they're not, but the writer probably doesn't have enough expertise, excuse me, either academic expertise or professional expertise in a particular profession to really know what they're talking about. So the writers lack expertise. The audience is a general audience, probably anyone who can read, and that's it. So these are general sources, and they're generally not good for college papers, with a few exceptions. Next, we come to like 14 and 15. Those are your more professional kind of sources, what I call professional sources, or maybe quasi-academic. Quasi is a Latin term meaning almost or partly academic. More professional. So either the person has professional expertise from working in a particular profession for a long time, or maybe they have academic expertise, but they're writing for a non-academic or less academic audience. Like, here's another Steven Pinker book. Where was it? Yes. Yeah. So he's an academic expert, but he's writing this for maybe non-experts in linguistics. He also is a linguist. Non-experts in linguistics. So it's by an expert, but for non-experts. For an educated but non-expert audience in the field. So those are what I call professional sources. They're fairly professionally written. There's some use of sources, maybe formal or semi-informal way of citing the sources, but it makes good use of good sources. And it may summarize information and explain it to kind of an educated but non-expert audience like us. From 16 here on the handout, we get into different kinds of original academic sources, and some of these are kind of maybe they represent kind of a master's thesis is not generally good. It's some graduate students' first attempt at doing original research. PhD dissertation maybe, but I don't think you want to read a whole dissertation, baksa nonmun, or claim that you read it and understood it. Research journal articles like these, and monographs and stuff like that, those are the heavy stuff. You might get into some of that in your 3rd or 4th year of college, or especially when you go to graduate school for master's or PhD, you get into that a lot. So those from 16 to 22, those are real academic sources, but again, master's thesis or a conference paper may not be enough quality to really use, but the rest of these generally are, but you're probably not ready for a lot of those kinds of sources, at least not yet. Some of them may be, but it's better to maybe find a more professional source that you can deal with. I will also put links on the website to some articles from Psychology Today. It's a professional source, but pretty high level. I'll give you the links to some of the articles about gender issues. You can compare that to the Guardian article and see there's a big difference. Articles from Psychology Today, some of them seem very academic, very technical, but it's a secondary source because they are reporting and summarizing psychology research for maybe non-experts, professionals, but maybe people who are not experts in psychology research. So it's quite different from the Guardian article. So Psychology Today is almost academic, but it's summarizing other research and interpreting it and summarizing it for you. The academic sources, the real academic sources, represent real original research. Who writes this stuff? Professors, full-time researchers, PhD students, they write this stuff. So it's by experts, by academic experts, for other academic experts. So this is how I distinguish sources, the kinds of sources that you will use in college papers. Your first 2 years of college classes, introductory classes, more likely you're going to use professional quality sources. You're not ready to handle academic sources yet, even into your 3rd year. Or also, especially if you're in a more practical field like business, you'll probably use these sources a lot all throughout your college papers. But in particular fields like English linguistics or literature studies, your specialized classes, your 3rd or 4th year, next we have different types of sources for college papers. That's the next page in your handout. Can you use Wikipedia, for example, in college papers? Can you cite that? No, but why? Why do they say, oh, you can't cite Wikipedia, you can't cite encyclopedias? Which of these are valid? Which of these are good? And why? So these kind of range from popular sources to more academic sources, but where do you draw the line? Where do you kind of divide them? What's an academic source? What's a non-academic source? And how do you tell? So there are a number of different types of sources here. I want you to discuss these, and again in terms of style, tone, type of information and ideas, how sources are used and types of sources used, the writer's expertise, and the intended audience. How are these different? And based on this criteria, which of these are probably good for college papers and which ones are not so good for college papers or should not be used for college papers, and why? So I want you to discuss these for a while. So pause the video and talk. Okay, so you might see how some of these sources are obviously not of good quality for college papers. Some are, and some are kind of in a gray area. It will depend. There are certain kinds of sources that are maybe okay for a freshman, for writing a paper in a freshman or 2nd year class, 1st or 2nd year college class, an introductory class, but you probably wouldn't use it for a paper in your more advanced 3rd or 4th year college class. And the kind of stuff you deal with in your 3rd or 4th year college class and the kinds of sources you would read and cite in papers, you're not ready for that yet in your 1st or 2nd year of college. So that's why I think the traditional distinction between academic sources versus non-academic, general, popular sources is not really helpful or useful. Because one, I think it's more of a continuum, and there's more, it's more complex. I make a 3-way distinction in sources. I make a 3-way distinction. I say there are general or popular sources that you generally don't use for college papers. There's a good reason why common sources like Wikipedia, encyclopedias, common reference works, popular books, popular magazines are not generally cited or used for college papers. There are a few exceptions which we will talk about in a later video, but pretty much at least 1 through 11, certainly not, also 12. Most college textbooks, especially in regular college courses, they're written as college textbooks, and they actually represent what is relatively general or common information in the field. It may be new to you, but it's not new in the field. It's not really that informative and it's not original or first-hand, it's second-hand. It's a summary of what is commonly known in the field. 13 newspapers like these. I'm not sure about, some of these are kind of a gray area. They're a bit better than 1 through 12. So it's kind of a gray area, these are sort of popular sources, but they're maybe a bit better than the others. It's kind of a gray area. They may or may not be usable depending. But I would kind of call them popular or general sources. So with possible exceptions of some of these in 13, 1 through 12, 1 through 13, these are popular or general sources. And the style is very informal, colloquial, conversational. The quality of the information and ideas is not really deep. It is generally common knowledge, general knowledge, even general knowledge in a college field, as well as fiction. Some of the items in number 9, though, some of these, if it's written by an expert, though, that actually might count as a more professional source. So actually, some of the books in number 9 might be okay for college papers, at least a freshman paper, because they are a bit more professional quality. But for most of these, except for maybe 9 and 12 and 13, for many of these categories, these popular sources, the writers may not be experts. They may not be trained academic or professional experts. They may not even know what they're talking about. The audience is a very general audience. Many of these don't cite sources, or if they do, they may not be very good sources. The audience is very general. We get into kind of better quality materials with some of these better periodicals, maybe to some degree 13, but especially 14 and 15. So periodical is something that's published periodically, newspapers and magazines, in other words. These are generally written by experts, at least professional experts. So the science magazines are written by science journalists. They have at least a master's degree in a science field. They can understand the science research and they can explain it to you. People who write for The Economist, they have some academic and or professional expertise and background in economics and business and finance. These news sources here in 14, professional journalists and editors and analysts. 15, professional trade journals, as I mentioned, written by experts for maybe non-experts, but educated people, professional. So 14 and 15 are what I call professional sources. So the traditional two-way distinction between academic and non-academic popular journal sources, you may have been taught that in a writing class before. I find that too simple, too simplistic. It doesn't really work because obviously many of the sources, like 1 through 13, you may not cite in a college paper, but 14 and 15 you probably would cite in a college paper, these professional sources. Your first or second year of college, you're not ready to handle real academic sources, so you'll probably be using professional sources like these in 14 or 15. Or even in some practical fields like business fields, social work, for example, you might use these kinds of sources even in your third and fourth year of college, especially a lot. In your third or fourth year of college, you will also start to deal with more academic sources, which we'll get to next. But with the professional sources, the writers are experts of some kind, either academic experts or professional experts. They have professional expertise from working in a particular profession for a long time, and reputation and credibility and a lot of knowledge and understanding, or they are academic experts writing for a non-expert audience. Now from 16 on, we get into academic sources. So these are sources by experts for experts. Now 16, a master's thesis is kind of a gray area because this is somebody's first attempt at serious research, but the quality of master's theses, it really varies, and they may not be good quality because it's somebody's first attempt at doing this. PhD doctoral thesis, Paksa Nunmun, that's an academic source, but I wouldn't advise you to use it because I don't think you would be able to read a 200-page research document and understand it and use it intelligently. They're long and they're big. Some of the others, like conference presentations, unpublished articles, they may be somebody's preliminary research and it hasn't really gone through much checking or anything yet. So the most common academic sources are things like academic books, monographs, academic research books, articles from academic research journals like these, and other kinds of research papers. Those are real academic sources. And again, don't try these unless you can actually understand them. Your third or fourth year of college, you'll start to read some of these in your linguistics classes or literature classes and such. And you go to graduate school for a master's or PhD, you will read these all the time until you're sick of them. These are the heavy academic sources. So the style and tone are very academic and technical, and may be too much for you. The information is original research. These consist of original research. The other sources, the general and professional sources, are not usually original research. This is original research. The writers are experts. They are professors, they are PhD students or full-time researchers. They are experts writing for other experts. The audience consists of other academic experts. And that's why these may be too much for you. Sources are used, a lot of sources are used, academic and technical sources, and they are cited in a very formal citation style, which we will learn about later. So these criteria help us distinguish general sources from professional sources from academic sources. And there's it's kind of a continuum. Sometimes there are gray areas in between. So if you think about these general criteria, the style and tone, the type of information and ideas that are presented, and how informative they are, how deep the information and ideas are, the sources used, the kinds of sources used and how they're used, the kind of information which is primary research information for academic research articles, and usually not primary original and not necessarily primary research information in the other types of sources, as well as the intended audience. These criteria distinguish these kinds of sources. Popular sources that you generally don't use for college papers, professional sources which you will use in college papers a lot, and academic sources which you might start to use in advanced college courses. I will have more to say about these later, some more detailed explanations and examples in the next videos. But as writers, it's helpful to understand what makes something an academic source, what makes something a professional source. This is a three-way distinction that I follow. I think it's more useful. Traditional writing courses, as I might have mentioned, only distinguish between academic and non-academic sources, non-academic popular journal sources. That's an inaccurate and simplistic distinction. I think it's too simple. It's more like a continuum where there are gray areas, and there's this middle ground of professional sources, because these are things that you will use in college papers as sources, even though they're not full academic sources. These are good for most college papers. unless you're taking a pretty advanced course. Okay, so by now hopefully you kind of understand this three-way distinction between popular, professional, and academic sources. And I have to emphasize this because so many writing classes and other classes emphasize academic versus popular sources, and I think that's a simplistic distinction. So you do use professional sources in college. They're not quite fully academic, but they're valid, especially in your more introductory classes. For this class, of course, you can use professional sources, but then especially if you're a midterm and final, again, I want you to also try to use some academic sources for whatever kind of paper you're doing for the midterm and final in this class. So I hope this helps. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments here on YouTube or in the LMS. In the next video, we're going to go more into looking at an academic article. There is part of an academic article, an actual academic research article in the book. I'm going to give you a link to the full article, and I'm not going to expect you to understand that thing. It's a bit big and heavy, but I'm going to ask you to maybe look at parts of it, skim it, and kind of think about what are the different parts of this little beast, and what are they doing, why are they here, so that you can start to learn from this and do something in your paper for this course. Okay, until then, good luck, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.